have to explain things to me like I'm in kindergarten because as you probably know, because you've been doing this a long time and with your podcast too, the people who are listening to your podcast are probably not CPAs. They're normal people like me, and we want to understand in regular people language what you're talking about. So you said a lot when you were talking in your introduction and things that you do about tax planning. So what is the difference between like people who are listening and are like, oh yeah, I have a guy, he does my taxes, right? Or like, oh yeah, I use TurboTax or whatever it is. What's the difference between what you're talking about with tax planning versus I have a guy who does my taxes?
Yeah, and I think that's so important because even with accountants, people have misunderstood like kind of what this idea of tax strategy is or tax planning. And so I break it down to tax planning versus tax prep. And so tax prep is what people typically think about when they think of taxes, when they think of working with an accountant. And that is just preparing and filing a tax return and then sending it off to the government, the IRS, or the state agencies. And so tax prep is just saying, here's all the activity that we had last year. Here's the income I had, maybe some interest, maybe some capital gains I had, whatever it might be. Here's all the income I had, and here's some deductions. And here's the amount that I paid in tax throughout the year. And then we're filing a tax return. We're either getting a refund, which means that we paid the government too much, or we have an amount due, which means that we didn't quite pay the government enough, and we're kind of truing that up. And so tax prep's important. Tax prep's required by law. But all tax prep is it's taking information, telling the government, here's what my life looked like from an income and expense standpoint throughout the year. And that typically happens after the year's over. So we're looking back at it. We file in January, February, March, April for last year's type of activity. When we look at tax planning is saying what strategies can I implement? What things can I do in my business between January and December before the year's even over? But what things can I do within my business to help lower my tax liability? So it's working about strategy, not just so much sending information up. And I think that's where there's a lot of confusion because a lot of people say, well, I do tax planning. Like my accountant tells me, send in estimated tax payments of this amount. And I said, well, that's planning for taxes owed. I guess it is a planning of some sort, but that's not what we're talking about. When we talk about tax planning, we're saying, hey, how do we legally hire your kids in your business and take expenses, money that you pay your kids anyways, or help support them in? How do we make that into a business deduction? Or how do we, you're working in a home office. How do we turn that into a business deduction? Or, how do we set your entity structure up the right way to make sure that you're paying, protected from a liability standpoint, but also paying the least amount of taxes as legally possible? That's the planning piece. And then at the end of the year, that tax prep and filing, that's just taking the information and sending it up to the government.